Okay, it's been a while. Trust me, I know. But this time, I've got a lot more to show. Let's get into it. So, I went on a small hiatus after the first devlog, and had a reawakening. That's right, baby. I meditate now, because that's what gamers do nowadays. Right? Right? Anyways, I decided that the current game was very lackluster in just everything. So, I had one goal in mind. Make it look sexy using Niagara's advanced particle system, which is a really great particle system that can do just about anything you ask. Did you know that I'm really...
You suck!
I also started to look into Unreal's new enhanced input system, which basically helps to organize game input like shooting with LMB or jumping with spacebar. I want to say that this was easy, but look at this stupid face. Does it look like he knows what he's doing? No. To sum up everything that happened across the 2 days of upgrading input, I moved all the input and it worked. Yay! But after trying to optimize some excess booleans that I scattered across all my blueprints, the player's camera decided to have a stroke and completely corrupted the rest of the project. All was lost. But luckily, this has happened so many times before that I came prepared and already had a backup just in case. But I hadn't updated it for over a week's worth of progress, meaning that I'd have to backtrack and go through each file of my corrupted project to copy onto the backup. Ugh. Anyways, that took 2 days to fix, and I couldn't just migrate or copy the files from one project to another either. Since the project was corrupted, copying the files would corrupt the backup. But I always had backups of the backup before committing to anything, since this would be a dangerous process of copying files that may or may not be corrupted. But it was done, and everything came out so much smoother and more optimized. Thank gosh. I then worked towards cleaning up the project and its files, essentially making each weapon blueprint work on fewer blueprints so less actors would be counted on screen at a time, obviously reducing lag. Next what the heck was that? What the heck? Run! So yeah, I ran into another problem because I wouldn't have content if things didn't go wrong. Right? Right? Essentially, the arrow system was bugged. When trying to keep the object spawned to a minimum, I had to modify the arrow script which secretly used 2 arrows, one moving and one stationary. This was for collision checks as the moving arrow had a weird collider issue that I found easier to fix by swapping out with a stationary arrow upon collision. But I wanted to clean up the code and attempted to move all blueprints to the single moving arrow rather than spawning a stationary arrow on hits. Because of this, the arrow was eternally held between space and time, right under the player's armpit. Great. Just great. So, after a few hours of torturous bug checks and debugging the code by printing words to the screen during different events, I finally figured out a way to fix it. Basically, I realized that when moving the arrow along the predetermined spline path, I never stopped the timeline from playing, meaning that the arrow would be forced to keep moving till it reached the end of the path, regardless of any collisions. So, I stopped it when a collision occurred. I also realized the collision check for physics objects or players could be simplified to a single branch of nodes rather than 2, so I cleaned that up as well. I then moved on to spicing up some of the graphics, using models and animations I just yoinked from a free Unreal project on the marketplace. First to spice up was the bullets. Using their effects, I worked on combining the code from the project I yoinked and my own project so it could work with my code. This was simple enough, and I moved on to the animations, which were even easier to set up. I just turned them into montages that could be automatically blended in and out of from the main animations, and I called the montages to play when I fired.
Wow.
Easy peasy. I also decided to have fake collision to optimize the game, so it wouldn't have to handle too many things all at once. It was time for big brain mathing time. First, I'd have to call in my old high school elective physics studies, recalling various velocity formulas to find the time required to reach the hit point. Ultimately, this was stupid because all I needed was the speed distance time triangle you use in primary. Speed equals distance on time, thus time equals distance on speed, and using this time, I set a delay for when the line trace counts a collision, since Niagara's collisions are more performance heavy. Obviously, I check if the collision still counts when the delay occurs to avoid collisions counting even if the enemy moves, because obviously, duh. I then got sick of the big brain stuff and moved on to new features like a bounce pad, hanging lights, and a ton more. Then I could work on the effects for each new feature. Isn't that clucking awesome? I also glossed over some other features in the previous video, like a pressure pad and a movable box. So yeah. Anyways, let's move on to graphics updates. First, we import a bunch of Quixel materials and models, and just everything Quixels. Then, we research about proper level design and how to make a level start leveling. And done. We have a playable level. Here's where I did something really dumb, and decided to update to a newer engine of Unreal, UE 5.4.1. I really thought it was production ready without any research into it, and decided, hey, let's do a quick check if the game upgrades to the new engine. Once I saw that visually it looked fine, I deleted my backup file on the older engine and fully committed to the new version. Big mistake number 1. I then checked out the game, really loved how it looked in the newer engine, so I emptied my bin as well. Big mistake number 2. Once I got down and dirty messing with the new engine, there were a bunch of animation editor bugs and character movement bugs that messed up physics when moving on a platform. Obviously, it was too late to go back to the old engine now, and I wasn't ready to redo all of my work, so I had to fix the bugs myself. Watch this. Using 2 locations of the player at 2 different frames, I can also store the times at both those frames. By finding the delta of both the locations and the times, that's basically A minus B, I can find the velocity the player should be moving. Once I have this value, I can just apply it to the player when leaving the platform, and done! The animation bug introduced itself much later, when I wanted to create an animation for quick turns while running. This posed a much greater issue, as I couldn't code my way out of this. It was more of an engine bug that I'd have to wait to get patched out, so I moved on to better things. While browsing through YouTube, I realized the game was missing something. Even though movement felt awesome already, it wasn't bouncy enough. Thankfully, I came across a wall running tutorial that gave me the push I needed to move onto new movement types. I had tried following the tutorial, but it didn't work with my code, of course, so I had to rework it a bit. First, you slap that there, boink here, spank over there, and done! Look at that! Obviously, there's no animations just yet, because of the issue I mentioned earlier. As I was messing around with the editor though, I found out that ALS has a feature to manage player rotation via animations without root motion. What? I could then simulate artificial root motion using foot locking and an impulse of force when turning to give the player the small slide before completely turning around. Thus, I could fake a root motion quick turn. For some reason, I found a video that broke down the Uncharted hand-to-wall interaction, which then interested me in creating something similar. Using a line trace from the player, I could base the position of the hand on the distance of the player from the wall, where the closer the wall, the higher the hand was raised. Using this information, I could transition to a pose with open hands to properly glide along the wall. This would add just that little bit more subtle life to the character. Nice. Moving on, I needed to start working on world interaction, like doors and picking up objects. So, I wanted to do the door first since I already had an idea of what I wanted to do. Basically, I tried 3 different approaches. The first was a timeline that would play or reverse based on the player entering a trigger around the door. This was a fail because I wanted the door to be able to open outwards from any side that the player was on, limiting glitches from opening a door that pushes the player while opening. Because of this, it meant that the timeline would just flip the door's direction based on the player. So I moved on to physics-based movement. Unfortunately, the door could then be broken if the player forced themselves towards the hinges. Not cool. My last ditch effort was using interpolation. In baby words, Dada is here, then Dada glide there. Yep, it's just smoothing the rotation, and it looks pretty good. Thankfully, because of the hand-to-wall system I built earlier, it made it look as if the player was pushing the door open.
You know, I'm something of a scientist myself.
I then moved on to picking up objects. Since I don't have animations yet, the system was relatively simple. Basically, using a flip-flop node, I can switch between 2 things every time the function is called. This means that thing can stick to hand, and then unstick to hand. Done! And that's where we are so far. I'm gonna have to leave it there again, but I won't leave you guys hanging for what's next. I've currently been researching into Unreal's control rig system, which essentially simplifies all things animation, including procedural animations. You may have heard of this type of animation in games like Rain World, which is used for more organic movement in creatures with more than 2 legs. So I think you know where I'm going with this, but I'm gonna leave that up to the next devlog. If you like this video, consider checking out more by first flicking that subscribe button and flicking that thumbs up, gamer. Toodaloo.